The distrust suffered by the banking sector in 2009 is not one that anyone is in a hurry to experience again. This is why any alert of any negative trend in the sector triggers off alarm bells. That explains why there is some concern about reports of recent of an increase in non-performing loans in Nigerian banks. The percentage of non-performing loans is said to reflect the health of the banking system. A higher percentage of such loans indicate that banks are having difficulty in collecting interest and principal on such loans. As of 2009, non-performing loans were about 37% of all loans. This dropped to 2.97% in 2014. Now it is rising again and has been put at about 15% as of December 2017. A CBN report says the stress test it carried out on 20 commercial and 4 merchant banks revealed that only large banks can survive if NPLs should rise by 50%. Why are the figures rising? What is the implication? Is there any reason to worry? What role has insider abuse played in all these? We intend to discuss these and more on Nigeria Today. I'm Wilfred Ewalifu. And joining me right now in the studios is a very popular face on NTA, and Dr. Melafia Obadiah, former Deputy Governor of Central Bank. Dr. Melafia, you're welcome to Nigeria Today.
Wilfred, it's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Okay, let's go straight into the matter. Non-performing loans. I believe we have some of the report of recent issued by the CBN. What do you make of this report?
Well, it means we have to be concerned that non-performing loans have been rising rather alarmingly. Currently, we are talking of an order of magnitude of about 2.424 trillion naira. This is quite considerable. And as you rightly observed, it is over 15%. In fact, NDIC, in its own surveys, indicates that the percentage is closer to 19.91%, which is virtually 20%, if you round it up. So we need to be concerned, but I wouldn't say we should be alarmed, because alarm is the wrong mindset. We have to look at the figures critically and with some detachment and see what the real issues are, and to see how, we can take administrative actions that can remedy the situation.
Before we talk about, the actions that you can take to remedy, let's backtrack a bit. We're talking about 2.97% or thereabouts at 2014, and this figure has gone up to almost 20%. And you don't think that's enough reason to worry?
Well, I said we should be concerned, but worry doesn't solve problems. There were several factors that led us to this state of affairs. The first one was the recession, way back from 2015, 2016. These were very difficult years. Officially, we are now out of recession, but some of the residual effects are still there. Secondly, bank exposure to the oil sector. A significant portion of these non-performing loans were incurred by the oil sector. And of course, the oil sector has experienced very sharp drop in prices. And some forecasts tell us that, this is the new normal. They are very unlikely to rise up to $90, $100 per barrel that we saw several years ago. So low oil prices have become the new normal, whereas these people had incurred these loans in the hope that, prices will continue to rise, and they haven't done so. And also exposure to FX, which are quite related. Many of the loans were incurred in foreign exchange, and of course, when you had devaluation, it simply doubled the naira cost of servicing these loans. And of course, the Central Bank Monetary Authority, in trying to control inflation, kept the MPR quite high, and that on its part has helped to increase the cost of paying back the loans. So all these factors have made it very difficult for business in key sectors, especially the productive sectors, and that has also affected their ability to be able to service their loans in the manner that they ought to. This is really what has led us to this impasse.
Okay, fine. Dr. Malafia, if you recall, in 2017, the central bank fired some bank directors, and it had to do with what was alleged to be insider abuse relating to non-performing loans. How much of a factor would that have been in what we are seeing today?
I mean, I agree with you completely, Wilfred. We should also be very concerned about that, because I don't think the problem has gone away, much as we would have loved to have thought that it has gone away. There are still a lot of insider dealings. Now, the CBN brought out guidelines and said, look, there's got to be clear reporting. If directors are taking loans, they ought to be able to make it public so that everybody knows that, yes, this director has taken so much loans for whatever purpose. And I don't think that has always been happening. And knowing also the Nigerian environment, if they don't want to do it publicly, they will do it by proxy. They'll still collect by proxy, and you know, they somehow have a way of now caging these prospectively bad loans with a view to simply washing them off as bad loans.
Let me just come in. First of all, if you recall, the banking crisis we had in 2008, 2009, I mean, so much of it had to do with the issue of insider abuse. It was a huge, factor in what happened after that time. I would have thought that there would be some kind of governance mechanism to, as much as possible, minimize this. So why are we still seeing this playing out?
But you see, in fairness, it wasn't just that. It was a whole combination. There was the subprime crisis and the issues that followed it. The same things we are dealing with, you know, exposure to the oil sector, exposure to FX, and of course there were some people that were directly just, you know, dipping their hands into depositors' funds. We don't see much of that anymore, because I think, in fairness to the CBN, they have been more steadfast in watching that. But this is not to say that the insider abuses have gone away. Unfortunately, they haven't. So I agree with you.
Have they just got it smarter? Because, I mean, some of the reports we had as at last year were suggestive that it is still quite high.
No, but let's be careful. I don't think it is only insider directors that would have incurred this magnitude of non-performing loans. There would have also been politically exposed people who have become people that you can't push around easily because of their political standing or their political connections. You and I know that politicians are very bad business people. They can't manage anything in terms of business. Maybe that is why they go into politics. And when such people take loans for business purposes, they don't always succeed. So it's a whole combination of factors. But I agree with you, yes, they are getting smarter, but it is the duty of the regulator to get even smarter. You should always be ahead of the game, you know. So that,
we're talking about the regulator at this time. I mean, we talked earlier on about the stress test that was carried out. Is this a routine thing, or is it triggered by some intelligence report?
Well, it could be triggered by intelligence reports. It could also be routine. You know, there are regular periods in which there's a financial stability board, and this financial stability board has its own working procedures. They have regular stress tests that they carry out with or without evidence of things happening. So even in routine checks, some issues can come
What does the bank look out for in conducting the stress test? What really are the indicators that they're looking for?
Well, the level of liquidity, money out, ability to service their portfolios, and also if there are windows that they borrow, the regularity with which they borrow from the central bank itself is a good indicator. That is how, in fact, Oceanic Bank was caught pants down, because of their, you know, persistent and obsessive access to the CBN window, that raised the alarm bell. So there are all sorts of criteria they look at, mainly liquidity position and so on, and the data and the statistics. That is really what they look out for.
Yes, and I believe you must have seen the report that was issued by the central bank on the basis of this stress test. And the effect, he was suggesting that if there is any deterioration in non-performing loans,
Yes,
that only major banks can bear the risk.
well, it depends at what level.
I mean, we're saying even by 50%. If there was any further deterioration by 50%,
By 50%.
I mean, just talking about the capacity of the banks to carry this risk, of these NPLs now.
Yeah, that may well be the case, but we should be careful about generalities, Wilfred. This is because they said, well, the average percentage now is around 20%. It doesn't mean each one of them is at 20%.
Okay.
Some are in fact much better. A few are in a much better position. They are not having some of those problems. And it is not discreet for us to start mentioning individual banks because, of the sensitive nature of this. It can be misconstrued by our listeners. So I'm always careful about these things. We should speak generally about the situation. But some are doing reasonably well. Some actually don't have much of that problem. Now let's get it clear. All banks have some level of non-performing loans. All banks.
It's I think it's one of the things about business in any case.
If it is 3 to 5%, you don't normally worry. Okay? You go fishing, some days you catch more, some days you catch less. That's the nature of the business. We're now talking about the magnitude. And some banks are less prudent than others. And so they get themselves into this kind of quandary. But on the whole, I think we are not yet where we should start panicking. I agree with you that when it reaches something like 50%, we should be very worried. But I hope, and I hope earnestly, that we will do everything to stem the tide of that precipitate decline in the level of financial prudence. We hope that we don't get to that.
Dr. Milafe, I can understand your disposition in wanting to be quite reassuring with your comments. But when you already start having some questions when raised pertaining to some figures that are now in negative territory, you can understand if there is some concern by, particularly the banking public in view of the experience of 2009. I believe so.
Well, you know that it was a very costly rescue.
Yes.
And rescues, we're talking about almost 16 trillion of government money. Incredibly huge amounts of money, more than the average annual budget, and by several magnitudes, in fact. So we should be very concerned, and we should all take bold actions, the fiscal side, the monetary side, to ensure that the problem is checkmated at this level so that it doesn't get out of control. And let's also get it clear that it is not always because of fraud or corruption. It is just sometimes incompetence.
Yes, I mean, of course. I mean, but also that is part of the reason why the regulator, stays on top of it with regards to the issue of competence, and then talking about the framework and the structures. But we'll talk a bit more about that, Dr. Milafia, right after this break. You're watching Nigeria Today, and we are looking at non-performing loans in Nigeria banks. Stay tuned, and we'll continue after this break.
Coming up on NTA News 24. Nigeria Today, 7:30, Monday to Friday, with exciting anchors on topical issues. Inspirators, a search for those who inspire others. Business 24, a business magazine program. Late edition repackaged. Fresh and exciting programming on NTA News 24. Stay with us.
Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Nigeria Today, and we have in the studio Dr. Badaya Malafia, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, discussing non-performing loans in Nigerian banks. Dr. Malafia, before we went on that break, you started talking about the issue of fraud, and you were saying that that should not be a major worry. But the NDIC actually released a report, I think just probably over the last 1 week, indicating that fraud accounts for about 12 billion naira loss in Nigerian banking system.
Sure.
Shouldn't that be a worry?
Let me correct an impression, Wilfred. I actually didn't say that fraud is not something we should worry about.
That's not part of the causal factors for this.
I'm not saying that it's not necessarily the only factor. That is really what I said, that you have to look at other variables as well. Yes, fraud is a problem, and it's a problem that we must worry about. But when you are talking about non-performing loans of 2.424 trillion compared to 12 billion fraud, and I agree that this is the one that is reported.
No, I think what the report said was that it wasn't even reported.
Yeah, it was not even
reported. That's
exactly. But fraud continues to be a problem. But I expect that with BVN, it should be reduced, and also with the more stringent, it should also be reduced. And also, what worries me about the fraud issue is that, in fact, I'm made to understand that even banks try not to report some of their people involved for whatever reason. We don't know why. But in Europe, in Britain, people conduct hundreds of billions of pounds and dollars even without knowing each other. And I was curious. I asked some of my colleagues there, I said, but why is this? They say, well, in this business, you can only deceive people once and you're gone. So they are so rigorous that once somebody is caught doing this sort of thing, he's finished forever. So it's not worth the risk. So, but unfortunately in our client, somebody can commit one fraud in this bank this year. Next year he's working in another bank, in fact, even been promoted. So there's got to be internal industry discipline to weed out the bad eggs and to make it so prohibitive that they'll think twice before engaging in this kind of nefarious activities. So we shouldn't sort of downgrade fraud, but we should look at other factors: professionalism, competence, the role of the regulator. All stakeholders need to do their part.
Yes, okay, that brings us to still the issue of the role of the regulator now. And the CBN actually, carried out the stress test and all that. And I was asking initially if it's a routine thing with the bank to conduct this. But beyond this, how does the bank really stay on top of things with regards to ensuring integrity in the banking system?
How does the CBN
ensure integrity? Yes.
Look, it is one of the constitutional mandates.
Yes, of course. I mean, how does it go about this, beyond the stress test?
Yeah, okay. The stress tests are actually a regular thing. They didn't used to be done before. In the past, people waited until there was evidence. And in fact, some of the banks were into very nasty habits. They used to call it demarketing. They start spreading rumors about their rivals so that people will panic and so on. When I was part of the regulatory side, we warned them that anybody found doing that will be punished. And of course, they stopped. So they don't try to demarcate each other deliberately anymore. But rumors are things that sometimes you cannot discount. So in the past, on the basis of whispers, you will now set up or behavior of some of the banks in terms of the access to the window. So there are some they look very desperate, where you see some liquidity challenges, then you carry out the stress test. Now they do it regularly.
How long does, because you see, I'm sure that for a number of Nigerians, they probably have had some experiences. Yes. And I can speak to a personal experience right now with a financial institution.
Okay.
And it's been over 1 year, 2 years that it has not been able to honor its obligations to its customers. So when I ask a question about how much of a finger does the CBN have on the pulse of all these institutions, I'm actually asking based upon experience.
Okay, I get your point.
Yes.
Today, as I understand it, they conduct these stress tests on a regular basis. Within the CBN itself, this is a Financial Stability Committee. and it has its own working procedures. Sometimes the stress tests are carried out based on, you know, concerns expressed, like some of this you have expressed. Others are on a just regular routine basis. Don't forget, almost every month, quarterly basis, we have inspectors going in there to check the finances of these banks.
But is this the possibility to cook the books?
It is very possible to cook the books. That is very true. And when the Pope in medieval times used to send cardinals to the provinces, some of them will go native. And there have been instances, evidence of actually even CBN, sometimes the inspectorate group, you know, they are kept in hotels and simply given an office somewhere. And I'm not saying it happens now, but, you know, we had worries and concerns about that many, many years ago. Okay. So I hope we have overcome those kind of issues. They need to understand how important their role is. There are areas, I agree with you, Wilfred, that they should concern us. And all stakeholders should be steadfast, should be alert. There are things that should give us real concern right now. But we hope that the fiscal side, the fiscal authorities, the monetary authorities are up to their game, will investigate these issues. If there are banks that are facing their situation, then bold action needs to be taken. But I have to caution also that in this kind of conversation we're having, we ought to be also careful, because you can say the wrong thing and actually set a panic. It has happened before in the history of financing. So the monetary authority, everybody should be cool-headed, focused, and rigorous. Look at the numbers dispassionately, and if there are banks having concerns, you take them over and do what you must do.
Yes, also there was some talk about private asset companies taking over these NPLs. I mean, how viable is that?
AMCON? Or
no, says private asset companies. Yes, that seems to be a novel idea.
Well, that is also possible, but I think we need to cross the bridge. There's no point speculating on who can take over what when we have not carried out a proper diagnosis, when we don't have concrete evidence that things are at that desperate level. And I don't think they are at that desperate level yet. And the CBN ought to do its part. It ought to do its own due diligence. There's also concern about the downgrade. Of course, you know Moody's downgrade last year.
Yes.
Downgraded 8 banks. Some of the most prominent banks were downgraded, to B1, I think, from B2. Okay, from B1 to B2.
Let me just come here at this point, because we're actually running out of time, really.
Sure.
Does it mean that these non-performing loans are gone forever? Or is there any chance that of any kind of recovery?
To be honest with you, if we have the will for recovery, we should do it. I suggest that the CBN put together a committee to begin to look at the question. And that committee should also include people from the fiscal side, from Ministry of Finance and others. Independent committee, look at the trend, the numbers, and if there are banks that are facing critical situation, then you do what you must do, what every central bank must do, because the financial system is more important than any single individual or any single group or board. And we need bold action. But first, we should be clear of the diagnosis, sure of the numbers, looking at them dispassionately, and taking bold action. It may well be that, but let's cross the bridge when we get there.
Okay, Dr. Milafia, we'd like to thank you very much about crossing the bridge. You're quite optimistic about the health of the banks, as it were, and being very, very careful about ensuring that there's no panic in the system.
Yes.
I understand that, but at the same time also, for the banking public, you should also understand the concerns.
Yes. But let's get it clear that for the last 10 years, no single Nigerian has lost his deposits in a bank. in spite of all the panics we've had. It's been very expensive. The rescue was very expensive, but I'm reassured by the fact that no single Nigerian lost his deposit or had deposit. So, inshallah, nobody will lose their deposit.
Thank you very much for coming on Nigeria Today, Dr. Melafia.
Thank you.
We've been talking to Dr. Obadiah Melafia, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, and the program has been Nigeria Today, discussing the issue of non-performing loans in Nigeria banks. You can watch the program online. The address is www.youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hall. That's our program. Thanks for watching.